welcome back. It's now 7 minutes away from 7 o'clock, and as promised before the break, we're going to be sitting down and talking with representatives from Yaaxche Conservation Trust. I know I might mess up that word.
Do a little math here about how to pronounce it.
Yeah, we will. And we have the Executive Director, Christina Garcia, and also the Community Liaison Officer, Bartholomew Teal. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And so let's go back for the lesson. How do you say the name?
Yaaxche Conservation Trust.
And it means?
It means the symbol, the saber tree, the cotton tree.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about Yaaxche, the Conservation Trust, and how long you've been around and the objectives.
Yes, so Yaaxche Conservation Trust has been in existence since 1998. It started with a small group of people that really believed that an area such as the Golden Stream Corridor Preserve needed to be, conserved because of its important watershed. And then later on, the organization grew. So the Golden Stream Corridor Preserve is a private protected area owned by the organization, owned by Yaaxche Conservation Trust. And later on, we moved on to signing the co-management of another protected area called the Belize Nature Reserve, which is considered a crown jewel of Belize because, it is restricted to education and research, and it's very biodiverse, given that you could find different species of plants, different animals, and it's a very important catchment area, especially for watersheds and especially for buffering communities that depend on those watersheds.
And now these areas are in the south of Belize.
It's in the south of Belize, the southern part of Belize.
Yes. Now, looking at the work that Yaaxche has been doing in that area, you have been able to maintain your presence for so many years. What has been the main focus of your work with these two particular reserves?
Yes, so we are considered to work in an area called the Maya Golden Landscape, as you can see in the map. And it is comprised of a mosaic of protected areas. As I mentioned before, we manage the Belize Nature Reserve with the Forest Department. We also have a private protected area called the Golden Stream Corridor Preserve. And we also have co-management for the Maya Mountain Nerd Forest Reserve, which there is currently an Agroforestry community concession, which my colleague will talk a little bit about later on. But like I mentioned, we've been there since 1998, and our two main program areas is the Protected Area Management Program, which we do enforcement, but also we do a lot of research and monitoring within the Belize Nature Reserve, Golden Stream Corridor Preserve, and now recently the Maya Mountain Nerd. But also we work with a lot of farmers. We enhance their livelihoods. We do agroforestry, the promotion of agroforestry. And of course, we're basing that on cacao. But most of what we do is basically the enforcement and enhancing livelihoods because of the unique area in which these protected areas are situated, and also in terms of the buffering communities that we currently buffer these protected areas. It is essential that we engage them, and it is essential that we work towards improving their livelihoods.
And what has that engagement been like?
It's been really, really well. Currently, we work with 120 farmers, and they've been really engaged in terms of our agroforestry programs. We've been promoting best agricultural practices, and also they see, the agroforestry as a program being very vibrant because we're basing it on cacao, and because there are two viable cacao companies in the Toledo district, and the price is really good. So farmers like the best agricultural practices. They like what they reap, and they do make an income out of these best agricultural practices, such as the agroforestry.
Let's talk a bit about it since we've moved into that particular area. That's one of the things that is new, and as you mentioned, it is only within the Maya Mountain Forest Reserve.
Maya Mountain North Forest Reserve.
North Forest Reserve.
Yes.
And you have both corn planting and cacao here, so I'm guessing that that these are the main agricultural products
Yes.
you'll be using, you'll be farming, right?
Yes.
So let's get the details about that.
Well, what we're displaying here actually is just a few of the products that we expect to be harvested from the reserve. But really, cacao is not only grown in the reserve, it is widely grown throughout Toledo district.
Yeah.
But in the Maya Mountain Forest Reserve, that is the focus of our agroforestry work. We are basing it on cacao, but we are also assisting farmers in the cultivation of food crops. You know, people do need to put food on the table, and corn, plantain. What we don't have here is beans and other staples that farmers need while waiting for the cacao to
So
produce.
your main crop will be the cacao.
That is what we're focusing on.
And
as
you
the
will
main
supply
crop.
to the Growers Association.
To the Growers Association, to other buyers, and to local chocolatiers in Belize.
Yes, yes. And of course, we know from conversations with them that there has been a greater demand for the agricultural product, the raw cacao.
There's always a shortfall in the supply
Yeah.
to the people who demand for cacao, organic cacao beans. We're still not supplying what they're asking for.
So you're hoping to fill a part of the void.
Substantially, we want to fill that.
And what made Yaaxche actually decide that the agroforestry concession would have been the best way to go?
As Christina explained earlier, the focus of Yaaxche is not only conservation. We think that conservation goes hand in hand with development. People depend on a lot of the resources that we are conserving. And for us, conservation means wise use of our natural resources. And as such, we want to link conservation with development of our people.
And this is why you keep on focusing on the Maya Mountain North Reserve, that you're using one particular area, and not that necessarily people will see farms of cacao or other crops in Golden Stream and Bladen and whatnot.
Yes, it's one particular area. The community forest concession was a permit we got from the forest department. Because it's a forest reserve, that particular activity is permissible in that forest reserve. Hence the reason why in consultation with the farmers, they came up with the idea that they not only wanted to conserve that particular area, but also to enhance their livelihoods, and hence the reason why they chose agroforestry. But it is an agroforestry permit, and it is legally permitted under the Forest Act.
Okay. And it's a revenue generator.
Yes, it is.
For whom?
For the farmers particularly. We work with 35 farmers called the Trio Farmers Cacao Growers Association, and it's comprised of 35 farmers, and whatever revenue is generated via the agroforestry, the planting of the cacao, or via the annual crop section that they have, which they have planted plantains. They're also doing vegetable. Whatever income is generated from the agroforestry concession is going to be for them.
Okay.
And also to some extent to government, because after producing and selling cacao, a certain royalty is going to be paid to the forest department.
Okay.
Now, you work in an area where there's a lot of farming already and subsistence largely, but we know that some of the challenges has to do with just money and getting money for the farmers. So how do you actually will seed, no pun intended, this actual project to get them on board and start up funds? Where will you get the startup funds from?
I think what most farmers are noticing these days is the impact and the effects of climate change. It is good to get into products that are short-term, quick cash, like rice, pepitos, beans, but the use of the soil over and over degrades the soil to a certain extent. Agroforestry, on the other hand, does not degrade or even denude a forested area. It brings forest onto your farm. So it's for the long term. And that's what our message to a farmer is not only to think tomorrow, think 2, 10, 20 years down the road. And more and more farmers are seeing what we are telling them about, especially when now they see the erratic weather pattern that comes along with climate change. They're saying we don't see much more production in corn. There's some times you see an very intense hot weather, 2 weeks, and right after you get heavy rains. You plant your corn, that affects the corn production. Same thing with planting. Same thing with most of the product, beans especially. Right now the beans is suffering. Some farmers who planted beans in December, January, the cold weather that we're having right now is having very negative impacts on our corn. So people are seeing that we need to change the practices that we are traditionally used to, the slash and burn, and plant in certain time of the year. We need to begin to have more an integrated farming system.
So what are some of the best practices that you're trying to now use as a change in terms of especially considering climate change?
Agroforestry. And we're encouraging our farmers to adopt what we call cover cropping using the Macuna beans, and alley cropping using leguminous trees, and plant our crops in between rows of these trees.
So maintaining the forest, that's key.
Maintaining forest and also enriching the soil, because soil is the most important thing that produces our food.
You know, this conversation takes me back to a conversation we had with Dr. Annabelle Ford with her book, The Maya Forest Garden. And what I seem to be hearing from you, and I want you to be able to distinguish, that it's almost going back not to traditional practices of farming by the Mayans, but what was established a long time ago, maintaining forests and utilizing different areas and rotating crops. Is that what the move is at this point in time?
Exactly so. Using traditional methods and knowledge with contemporary science and making it productive for our people.
Fantastic.
For food security.
Are you hoping that this will be a module that the farmers would be prompted to execute on their own property, in their own farms?
Definitely, definitely. It is something they are already executing. As I mentioned, we work with 120 farmers, and these farmers have adopted those best agricultural practices. Of course, in the case of the community forest concession, it's a very unique model because it has never been piloted in Belize before. And we know the state of our forest reserves in Belize. They're not, they exist as paper parks, but there's not a real enforcement being done within those forest reserves. So we think that the agroforestry concession model could be a good one for Belize and could be replicated in other forest reserves that have received some level of degradation, some level of illegal activities, because you have presence within the forest reserve. There is ownership, there is stewardship from the farmers that really want it, you know, and they are following those best agricultural practices. And of course, there are rules and regulations that they are following as well.
What has been the biggest challenge so far in terms of working with the farmers? Has there been any?
Of course.
First thing that comes to mind is funding. We're always, you know, we'd like to do much more with our farmers. Our farmers ask us much more assistance, but funding limits the activity that we could undertake.
Okay.
Another is, especially in Toledo, is land tenure. Land tenure is another challenge. These are long-term, and some farmers don't really have that tenure of that security of land for 15, 20 years. And because traditionally farmers, we believe in just moving all over and believe in what we say, okay, I don't really need any title to my land, this is community land. That's how to put some challenge to the work we do.
So has Yaaxche been working with communities or individual farmers and then putting them back to work with the community? Has your engagement been direct with the community or more with the farmers to deal with that particular issue?
Communities. Communities. When we go into communities, we usually first contact the village leaders, have a meeting, explain our work to the community, and those who are interested will then contact us afterwards. So we try to make it a community initiative.
So at what phase are you now in terms of the agro-processing?
Well, we have cacao being produced, farmers selling. Only in the Maya Mountain North Forest Reserve, we've just started. They've just planted some 24,000 seedlings this year gone. We're shooting to plant another 28,000 seedlings this year. So it's just a start in the Maya Mountain North, but in other community lands, in other communities, even before we started, even before 1998, there were farmers already producing and selling cacao beans.
What's the life cycle that you're looking at for the crops that you're taking? Because obviously, as you diversify, they'll have different cycles. So what kind of a span are you looking at?
Cacao could be very productive up to 35 years. And then you'll start to renew your farm, start to planting young trees. But by then, your timber trees that you would use for shade, mahogany, would be ready for the market. So it's another source of income that farmers could rely. Actually, agroforestry is like a banking, going to the bank and do some savings. So once the cacao is down, you have other things that you could use. There's your timber trees, there's your fruit trees, there's different product that you could actually get out of your agroforestry system. A good friend of mine, Chris Nesbitt, who has a research farm in the Maya Mountains, call it food forests. You walk in the forest and you collect food.
And because you have, the legumes and so many other things that you're also planting, and you're talking about protecting especially the top layer of soil, what's the regeneration patterns that you're looking at and the crop rotation to make sure that you do not deplete the soil?
I think with the use of leguminous trees will ensure that, and in particular we're talking about the Inga, which we locally call Bribri here in Belize. And also we use different a rotation of beans, the RK beans, the black beans. These are all crops that ensure soil fertility remains, or we maintain the soil fertility.
And I wanted to, in the interest of time, of course, move into some of the other areas that Yaaxche has been working in. And I know you spoke about the research capabilities in the areas that you manage. Let's talk about some of the research areas that you're currently working in. I understand there's some works being done with bats.
Yes, there has been an ongoing research with bats.
That doesn't sound too exciting.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the most attractive things. But
for the scientists, I'm sure.
Of course, and we just ran a program, a training, which we invited some young researchers in Belize to conduct bat research. And basically, we look at different indicators. We also do water quality monitoring. Monitoring the watersheds within these protected areas to really verify how healthy they are at the moment. Yeah. We also do a lot of botany work with plants. We monitor key species of trees within the Golden Stream Corridor Preserve and also Bladen Nature Reserve. We also do a lot of work with the rangers, because I must say that is very important. Yes. We do a lot of mammal surveys, and the rangers are not only involved in enforcement but also in monitoring. They're known as the parabiologists. They're trained in these different monitoring, so they do both. Yeah. We also work with a lot of international researchers. Currently, we have a researcher doing a research on trees within the Maya Golden landscape.
Okay. Now, one specific question I wanted us to look at was, we have conversations, obviously, with Friends of Conservation and Development very often, and especially important is you have a reserve that takes us to the border with Guatemala. Obviously, in the south, we know that the borders are equally as porous, and that culturally people move across very easily. Is that a problem that you face within the reserves that you manage at this time?
Yes, it is a problem that we face, particularly in the Belize Nature Reserve, because it's so close to the Guatemalan border. We have recorded level of encroachments happening within the area, just like the Cacao Forest Reserve. Of course, it's not in that grave stage, but if we don't do something about it, it might reach to that level someday.
What type of activities are they coming into the Belize to do?
The extraction of Yaaxche is one. We've had records of gold panning happening within the Belize Nature Reserve. Of course, there is timber extraction. There is illegal farming happening within the Belize Nature Reserve. We have had the records done by our rangers, really verification of those activities. So it is happening, you know, things are happening in the Belize Nature Reserve. And like I mentioned, if we don't do something about it at the moment, you know, it might 15, 20 years, you know, or even 10 years, we might be at the level where Cacao is at the moment.
And you're a much smaller area.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
What has been the engagement like between yourself and the forestry department?
We've worked on several initiatives with the Forest Department. I must say that both the NGO and the Forest Department are constrained in terms of human resources and funding. But I do believe that we're moving towards a more of a partnership, especially when it comes to the enforcement. We are moving into a partnership specifically for Maya Mountain North Forest Reserve. But again, you know, we always lack the human resources needed to do patrols, specifically in the Belize Nature Reserve. Because it's a very contentious area, you know, we need the support not only from Forest Department, but also from the Belize Defense Force, from the police. You know, so it needs to be improved. That it is a challenge, but at the moment, I do believe that we're moving towards, you know, that partnership.
And of course, you also open up, as you spoke about international schools coming in, you also recently had the younger students come into the area as well to be able to see the research that is ongoing.
Yeah, so we recently held a BioBlitz event. And basically, we invited students from different schools within the Toledo district to really view the work that Yaaxche is currently doing. Because I do believe that, you know, education awareness lies in the hands of the young minds. And we brought them in. We basically gave several presentations, and we utilize the rangers to actually show them how monitoring is done and the importance of monitoring. So they did learn a lot from it. They learn how to press trees, they learn about macroinvertebrates, they learn how to do water quality, they learn to use a GPS, a compass. So several activities were done, and it's the first time we did something like that. And we had like approximately 120 students that came to the organization to view the work
from schools in the area.
From schools in the area, definitely.
And amazingly, a lot of students could have identified several species of birds.
I'm sure, yeah.
And recently, the Global Trees Symposium, I know that's something that you all featured very prominently. Why expand the conversation, especially given the fact that so much of the work that you do is restricted to the South? Why expand and be a part of the conversation outside of the South?
Because I do believe that there is a connection to all protected areas at the moment. And many a times the South is sort of like the forgotten district in that sense. So what Yaaxche wanted to do is to bring key players to have a discussion, to have a conversation. And we did involve the Environmental Research Institute, especially the bachelor students. And we thought that it was a good discussion, not only to share information in terms of what's happening with logging concessionaires across the country, but also to hear from the experts what they thought about certain situation, what they thought about certain issue, and how do we move forward. We wanted to have that discussion. I know the Cacao Symposium was one thing that was done before, and that was really good. A lot of information came out. People are much more aware of what's happening there. And we also wanted to do the same for the protected areas that we manage down south.
And we had seen in the past the issues with Rosewood, especially.
Exactly.
But furthermore, a good friend of mine mentioned to me, the answer to climate change is plant a tree.
You know, I want to, just to be able to close out, because I see this map here, and it really made me think about the issue of de-reservation. Thank you. You know, a lot of times people look at all the different reserves that we have, and as the argument is, as we started off this conversation,
Yes.
is how do you balance the conservation and the development? Is this where you feel your agroforestry can be able to kind of be the middle ground for the merge between the two, or the compromise between the two? And is it going to be replicated in other reserves, for example, where it can be permitted?
Certainly, the reservation is not something I believe is good for protected areas, because there are alternatives, and certainly the agroforestry model is an alternative that could be used in other forest reserve as opposed to the reservation. Because if you can see on the map, the pink area is the reservation section that has happened in Maya Mountain North.
Yeah.
But if you would compare that to the green area where the agroforestry permit is, you'll be able to compare in a couple years what is done within the rules and regulations of the Forest Act, and also with the permit, and what will be done in contrast with what is done in the reservation.
Yeah.
We do believe that the agroforestry model that we have in Maya Mountain North could be replicated and could be done even in the reserve areas, you know, and in other forest reserves that are, you know, severely degraded and, you know, have been exploited to, you know, to that extent.
And that's going to be our task, to
Yeah.
get the farmers in the pink area to
Yeah.
copy what the farmers in the green
Because
area are doing.
they don't have to. The
Yeah.
requirements are different in your
Yeah,
reserve.
but if they could voluntarily agree to adapt to these
Yeah.
smart agriculture practices, then that's the way to go.
Yeah, and of course the best way to do that is to see the benefits.
Exactly.
Yes.
So let's close off with just being able to mention some of the activities you have coming up. There's a bike race, and I believe another activity as well, right?
Yes, in April 17th, we're going to be having, we used to have it on separate occasion. We used to call it Race Against Fire, where we raise awareness about the dangers of forest fire,
Yeah.
or just leaving your fire burning carelessly. We used to have an annual bicycle race, and then we used to have an annual award for farmers who we see adopting the practices we are promoting. This year we're combining both on the same day. So it's going to be April 17th, and we're encouraging all farmers, all our farmers that work with us, but people throughout Toledo to come on out and support this event.
Okay.
It's going to be happening in Golden Stream Village in Toledo.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and providing an update as to what has been happening with Yaaxche in the Golden Stream and Bladen reserves.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I envy FCD for being close by, to drop by every so often. It's a challenge to get here.
Well,
But
once
thank
you
you.
can, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, it's to talk about the annual Black March and raffle, so stay tuned.